We're thrilled to be here to tell you a bit about our story, about how purpose became our purpose, and some of the various strategies that we're using to try and integrate purpose into our student success strategy. In addition, we're going to tell you a little bit about the field more generally. The idea of sense of purpose is as old as time, as humanity, but the way that it's being integrated into higher education is a little bit newer. And so we're going to be telling you a bit about that research. So, to give you a sense of where we're going, we're going to start with how we got to sense of purpose by listening to student voices at UW-Tacoma, and then a bit about, as I mentioned, the broader literature of what is known around purpose and student success. Then we're going to take a real quick stretch break, because that's a long stretch there. And then we're going to be talking about what we're doing specifically at UW-Tacoma, and then what you're hopefully here for is to interact with each other. So we've got some opportunities for you to interact cross-campus or within campus. And then we'll have closing reflections. Thank you so much for those lovely introductions. So I feel like you have some sense of who we are. I am obviously Bonnie Becker from Academic Affairs, and I will turn it over to Amanda.
But I did want to just take a moment and share with you a greeting from the land in which our campus occupies, which is the home of the Puyallup tribal nation. And so the language that is shared by the Coast Salish people there is Lushootseed. And so I just wanted to say to you, Hak Shlahel, which is our greeting to say good day. And we're so excited to be here and to share with you in good spirit. Okay, so now we want to know a little bit about you and who's in the room. So raise your hand if you work at a two-year college. Excellent. If you work at a four-year college. Great, okay. If you provide direct service to students in your day-to-day work. Awesome. If you're faculty. Okay. If you're staff. Okay. If you are an administrator. Awesome. Okay. Okay, now, this is a test. If you believe in supporting the success of all students. There we go. Great. Okay, so we wanted to start just by getting y'all talking to each other, reflecting on your own sense of what does purpose mean, because we all have very individualized meanings about what this might mean in our life. So take a quick moment and you can think in your head for a minute or write down if you want to, how do you define purpose? And how or does it connect at all to your professional life and to your personal life? And so we'll just take a minute for you to do a self-reflection, and when you're ready, share with a partner at your table. So anything that you write down or share is by choice. Okay, so we'll just take a moment and we'll do that. Okay, I hear some great conversation happening. We're going to bring us back together. You can advance it, Lonnie. Well, there's many ways that folks have defined purpose. If we're thinking about the literature about sense of purpose and higher education, you could get into a knockdown, drag-out fight with folks about how we're defining purpose. But for the purpose of today's workshop, we're just going to define purpose as the underlying intention behind achieving significant personal goals that, when fulfilled, can lead to positive change in one's life and in society. So in this specific context, although sense of purpose, when we look across the field, is very much rooted in things like spirituality, maybe connected to religiosity, we're going to focus today on what literature has looked like in the field of higher education, and we're specifically going to look at pro-social purpose. So what does it mean when we're thinking about something that is meaningful to oneself and to the world beyond oneself? So that's where we're going to root today. So with that definition in mind, only defined for today's purpose, because I don't want to get in a fist fight with any psychologists who might be here, does this definition resonate with what you wrote? Consider the experiences that you had that led you to where you are and how you defined your own sense of purpose. What experiences or relationships stand out as important? So go ahead and think about that for a moment, and then turn to the neighbor you were discussing things with and chat about those.
So we hope that helped you sort of frame out the day as we're thinking about purpose. We're going to give you lots of opportunity to talk to each other about sense of purpose, but hopefully that gives you sort of a start to start getting into this topic. So we're going to tell you a little bit about UW-Tacoma just to give you some context of who we are and how we got here. UW-Tacoma has sort of an interesting history. It's a younger school. It was founded in 1990, but it was founded as a transfer-only institution. So in 2006, I got there in 2006 along with the first class of first-year students. And so we remain a very transfer-friendly campus. We're about half first-time in college and half transfer students. We're back up over 5,000 after our dip from COVID. 52% of our students are first generation, and that's been pretty consistent for a very long time. Through especially Amanda's leadership and folks in her team, we have been named one of the first-gen forward network champions on the West Coast. I think we're the first on the West Coast. And the only on the West Coast. So congratulations to that team. 63% racially minoritized. About 95% of our students are Washington residents. We have a dorm, but we are mostly commuter at this point, and we're pretty close to a very large military base, so we're almost 20% military connected. So we've also, I think, won a couple of military-friendly awards as well. So that's a bit about us. One thing that I really appreciate about UW-Tacoma is that it's rooted in the community of Tacoma. So back in a decade or two ago, there was an article in Newsweek that called Tacoma Public Schools, K-12, a dropout factory, which was not well received by folks in Tacoma. And so there was an effort for a large-scale community group to work on graduation rates in K-12, called the Graduate Tacoma Movement. It uses a cradle-to-career collective impact model, which is really, really cool stuff. We don't have time to dig into that, but we do have a QR code, so you can learn a little bit more about how they're structured. Graduate Tacoma had incredible success increasing the K-12 graduation rate in Tacoma Public Schools. It actually is higher than Seattle's, which is a point of pride in Tacoma, and realized that what happens after those students are graduating from high school, that our college-going rate was actually considerably lower than the rest of the state, or at least than our neighbors to the north. So the new goal, the 2030 goal for Graduate Tacoma, is more focused on college and post-graduation outcomes. So by 2030, 70% of Tacoma Public School students will earn a degree, technical certificate, or gain a good earning wage employment opportunity within 6 years of high school graduation. Targeted efforts will focus on students of color and those impacted by poverty. So one of the real strong pride points of the group is not only did they increase the overall graduation rate, but they significantly shrunk any sort of opportunity gaps that were based on race or socioeconomic status. So Amanda's been involved in that work for a very long time. We got invited to then join a group called Tacoma Completes that was focused more on the graduation rate of Tacoma students from college. As part of that, Graduate Tacoma got a grant from the Gates Foundation to work collaboratively both with UW-Tacoma, Tacoma Community College, and some other community groups to talk to students who left our schools in good academic standing. So the guiding question is, why? Why do students leave? We left it extremely open-ended, so there wasn't a lot of pushing students in one direction or another. And the idea was that this was meant to guide our work together as we strategize around student success across Tacoma. So what we found after talking to 56 students who left either TCC or UW-T is Some things that I think were very much expected, things around financial and basic needs, mental and physical health, family care and life events, were extremely common responses from students. And we continue to aspire to do as much as we can to improve around those sort of basic needs issues for our students. The thing that really struck us at the time is that the reason students left, the top reason students left, was around their sense of purpose and their sense of belonging. And so if you go to the next slide, this is what it sounded like from the student's voice. I really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do, and I think that's kind of the reason why I didn't continue with school. I really just think that I didn't have much motivation to be there because I didn't see what I was actually gaining by being in school. It was just kind of doing what everybody had always told me to do, that I was supposed to be at school. And then another student, and some of these are pretty representative. We heard very similar themes from a number of students. I didn't want to waste any more time and money not knowing what career I wanted to go into. So there was a lot of themes around resilience, that when students had a less of a clear sense of purpose, some of those other barriers that we are constantly working on but we know are there were a little harder for them to overcome. On the other hand, what does purpose sound like among some of our students who we have retained and in many cases are doing quite well? So we have a really cool program, again, around the First Gen office, where we have posters that go up, at least they come up once a year, where we celebrate our First Gen students, but also our First Gen faculty and administrators, including our chancellor. So this is a case where, I'll just read the quote. "I am a Black man who was raised in poverty, surrounded by domestic abuse, drugs, and violence. Statistically speaking, I should not even be stepping into a college campus, let alone walking across that stage to receive my degree. I realized my presence here was the answer to my ancestors' prayers. I would end the needless cycle of pain, heartache, and abuse. I would forever transform my family's trajectory." So one thing that we have certainly noticed is the integration of family and community into purpose among our students. Here's another example. Being a first-generation college graduate means that I have knowledge to open doors for others, younger family members, other non-traditional student peers or beloved pals, and showing them that new ways are possible. So those are kind of the types of things that we are hearing from students in terms of purpose. We were really excited to start thinking about how purpose could be enhanced. Students have their own sense of purpose walking in the door, right? But how can we as an institution help support students in the development, the deepening, and the achievement of their own purpose? I'll be really honest here that it took a minute for us to really for folks to really understand what we were trying to do around purpose, and we'll talk a bit about how we've integrated into our student success framework. But we're pretty excited that over the past couple of years, it's really become part of the campus strategic focus. So Amanda will play this video that was recently put together by our campus.
Meaningful progress begins with us, together.
When journeys meet on common ground, when different perspectives tackle shared problems,
When a community rises together rather than apart.
this spirit built the University of Washington, Tacoma, rooted in the South Sound and growing with it.
Here, students don't just enter the classroom, they define it. A transfer student,
A veteran,
an entrepreneur,
a student first in their family to attend college.
each story adds value.
Every voice shapes the conversation. At UW Tacoma, academic excellence isn't abstract. We live it.
Research doesn't just fill journals, it fills needs.
Learning extends into neighborhoods, businesses, and halls of government.
We meet students where they are and help them reach where they want to be.
Education here isn't just a path to a degree, it's a way to engage with what matters.
This is education with purpose,
Where potential becomes power.
where knowledge becomes action. UW Tacoma, rooted in purpose,
Powered by community.
So I think one of the reasons we wanted to share that video is not just because it was slick, but because we had nothing to do with the creation of that video. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the story of Bonnie and I working together is that we've been doing this work as co-conspirators for a decade. And we didn't start with purpose, but what we did find in the research that she described is a commitment to student voice. And so one of the things that we wanted to share that for is because this has permeated what our campus is really talking about, because we have had the opportunity to co-convene our cross-campus student success work, which Bonnie will talk about more. But let's talk a little bit about what do we know about how sense of purpose and how it impacts student success. And I will also share, you will have in a few minutes an opportunity to download these slides. We will share the slides afterwards, so don't worry about catching everything. We're happy to share them and anything else that you might be interested in afterwards. So one thing that we know about purpose when it is pro-social is that it is positively correlated with human thriving. So there's a broad field of research and a large body of literature that shows that it's connected to things like well-being, life satisfaction, the presence of meaning in your life, compassion, hope, grit, even life expectancy, and income and net worth. We also know that in more recent studies, there's been a positive correlation between sense of purpose, that is pro-social, and academic success. So we see that it is correlated tightly with academic satisfaction, with degree commitment, academic identity, retention, and degree attainment. So when I think about career success, there's lots of ways that folks frame that. I really like this definition, which is that it is the summation and the outcomes of work activities and experiences that have both positive material and psychological outcomes. So we're talking about wages, we're talking about unemployment, like lower unemployment, but we're also talking about those things like meaning in my work, the sense of autonomy over my life, the dignity that comes from contributing to one's community. And so, is anyone here familiar with Bates College and their Center for Purposeful Work? If you have not had a chance to see them, highly recommend looking them up. They have a really interesting and forward-thinking way that they're thinking about purposeful work. And they published a report with Gallup, and I really liked this quote, that colleges and universities must be more intentional in the design of curriculum and programs that will provide graduates with the skills, experiences, and self-awareness to be strong and competitive job candidates, not only for their first job, but throughout their working lives. Our economy is evolving more rapidly than any time in history. The jobs that exist 2 years from now, I can't imagine, especially when we think about AI and prompting and prompt engineering and all of the things that will cascade out of that. So when we think about setting up students, it's also not just for that first job. And even though that's where the accountability metrics are really anchored right now, both I would say at state and federal levels, as educators, we know that to help foster a thriving society for all people, we really have to be anchored in not just the immediate employment outcomes, which really matter, but also how are we setting them up to be adaptable for careers over their lifetimes. In the same study, Bates asked their alumni, how important is sense of purpose in your work? 80% of students said it's really important. And then they asked their graduates, how many of you have a meaningful career? And only 40% of their graduates said, my career is meaningful. So this is what Bates has coined as the purpose gap, which is becoming more and more adopted. So what do we know about how purpose develops? One thing I think that's really important is that sometimes in popular culture, we'll talk about finding purpose. In some cases, some folks might say there is an intrinsic purpose that you have to find. In the case of what we're framing is that we're saying that purpose is something that can be intentionally developed, and literature supports that. So it's often been described as a cycle. And of course, all cycles look beautiful when they're in a graphic, it's very linear and you go around and around. Of course, that's not how we experience things because we're messy humans. But they talk about this cycle of experience, act, reflect, and think. And so all of these aspects and how we're setting this up really matters to students in the development of their own purpose. What we do know from literature is that some of the things that catalyze sense of purpose include things like relationships, reflection on yourself, reflection on your context, and sustained effort over time. So if we look a little more granularly, then what we know, and I would say that research about what activities and practices we already do in higher ed are connected to the development of sense of purpose is emerging. But what we do know from recent studies is that having a professor who cares about you as a student matters to the development of that purpose. Having a mentor who pushes you to reach your goals matters to sense of purpose. Being engaged in extracurricular activities matters to sense of purpose. So does experiential learning. And particularly for first-gen students, high-quality peer support matters to that development of sense of purpose. Raise your hands if this sounds familiar, like perhaps things that you're already doing in your college. A few folks, yeah. So one of the things that excites me about this work is that it's not just about taking on a whole bunch of new things, but it's intentional reflection and thinking and expanding around what you may already be doing and may already be doing well. One of the things that has bubbled up for us, as I mentioned when we did that research, we said our commitment to student voice is really clear. And we had intentional conversations with each other, with our community, with our partners, and we said, what does it mean to center student voice? Well, in order to do this purpose work in a way that supports all students and their thriving, it really requires us to center student voices in a different way with an asset-based approach. This is not, I'm coming to you, poor first-gen student of color, to pour purpose into you. This is about understanding the assets and the strengths that students are already bringing to our learning communities and understanding how we can cultivate those, name those for our students, and help them to grow into those. So there is a theory that the First Gen Office has used since its inception, and it's the community cultural wealth theory. And it really says that students who have experienced structural and social barriers, if they're making it to our campuses, they're already coming to us with a wealth of experiences and strengths and skills that we can nurture. And so it talks about things like resistance capital. So these are the knowledges and skills that folks develop through challenges and inequities. It also talks about aspirational capital. So I've faced all of these things. I'm getting all these messages from society, but I'm still able to maintain my hopes and dreams in the face of those barriers. It also talks about family capital. So for a long time, I would say the field was saying that perhaps first-gen families were detrimental to students' college experience. But more recent research is showing that's actually not the case. They're really significant drivers of success. And so knowing that the cultural capital that you develop through your family, including your chosen family or extended family, is a strength. The social networks that you have, I'm sure lots of folks in this room have heard of social capital, so people in your personal networks that give you access to resources and support and opportunities. The navigational capital. When I think about what our students bring with them, if they just make it to that orientation, I am so impressed by what they have already been able to navigate and know that that's a skill that we can help them to grow. And finally, linguistic capital. So that is the intellectual and social skills that are gained through communicating in more than one language or dialect. So I will say the way that I present myself in this room on the stage is very different than when I'm hanging out with my husband over there in a pub. So that has some capital that comes with it to know your audience, to be able to communicate in different settings. And then, as this research was happening, my team became aware of this model by Pat Garriott. And when I was talking to him about how he developed this theory, he was like, he's the editor of a journal. And he said, I was really tired of getting deficit-based papers submitted. And so if you are looking for something that it's very heady, but it's also very actionable, the critical cultural wealth model of first generation and economically marginalized students' academic and career development. So how do we take this asset-based approach to thinking about how we're supporting students? How are we, we can go to the next slide actually. So we really like this, and we've adopted this as a department and now through our student success strategy work across the campus because it's based in assets and because it also allows us to be intersectional. So when we're thinking about students, particularly in our campus where first gen is a big deal, we can also think about how does that connect with other identities that students hold. So are they lower income? They may not be. Are they adult learners? Are they immigrants? Are they justice involved? One of the programs that I oversee is for former foster youth and unaccompanied unhoused youth who are at our campus. So how do we think about those intersectional identities and thinking about them as individuals? And it also invites us to question our systems, not our students. So it invites us to take a really close look at our policies and our practices. And so I'm sure many folks in this room have heard, we want to be a student-ready campus. And this is what this really means, is that the onus is on us. If you are meeting our admissions criteria and we're saying you can come here, we have a responsibility to make sure the supports are in place for you to be able to thrive. And finally, it really invites us to center students' voices. When I think about the diversity of student experiences that exist in the world, I will never be up on what all people have experienced. But there's a humility in an approach where you're asking students constantly and you are valuing their expertise. And there's continuous improvement to this approach, right? I'm not saying that we are here perfectly adapting all of the community cultural wealth model aspects, but as with all things that Bonnie and I are presenting, this has really been structured effort over time and a lot of trust building across student affairs and academic affairs. And so in order to understand student voice, what does that mean? I hear student voice a lot. One practice that we have really found to be very useful for us is around design thinking and design justice. So I moonlight as a user researcher for the Global Innovation and Design Lab at UW-Tacoma, where we really use design thinking to tackle wicked social problems. And so this belongs in a cycle of awareness, empathizing, before you define a problem, ideating, prototyping, testing, implementing. So we're never done with our work. There's a lot of great resources out there about design thinking, and even a great book by Allworth about design thinking in student affairs. So what does design thinking do for us? Well, at your tables, there are 3 personas that were developed by the Office of First Gen after interviewing students about career access, doing a survey for local community colleges and UW-Tacoma students about career access and their own thinking about that. And so you've got 3 personas that came from that research. And so what I would invite you to do is to pair up with somebody. There's 3 printed personas per table. Pair up with somebody, read through the persona, and consider how could the information from the student voices in this artifact boost, like how would you use that on your campus to boost development of a student's sense of purpose? So we'll take, how long are we gonna take? We're gonna take 5 minutes and we'll go through that.
So, next, we're going to start talking a bit about our case study of once we sort of found our purpose and purpose, then what? So we're going to be telling you a bit about our campus student success strategy and how we've weaved purpose into some of the activities of that larger scale strategy. So the way that we've set up the student success strategy had some framework around it that was really built on, as Amanda mentioned, our decade together working on this work. So using our data, we know that the students we are most likely not to retain are what we call first 3. So first time in college students in their first year with a first gen lens. So we've use the first three framework for all of our student success strategy work as like a universal design principle. If we're serving those students, we're serving all of our students. One of our major KPIs from our strategic plan and from our student success work is to narrow identity-based outcome gaps. So that is a major part of our framework. And then purpose and belonging, which came directly from the student voices work. One thing that I think was really different, in the next slide, we'll talk about how we've had different iterations. I've co-chaired a student success task force and a student success council. We have a council again now. One thing that I think was really powerful in the way that we approached this was we committed to a continuous improvement approach, which I feel like people talk about quite a bit, but what it means to me is that we take risks, we measure the results that we get from our outcomes, and then we adapt quickly. And one thing that we've added through some of our work with a consultant is we've started reflecting on our process more and more. So each time we sort of go back into another iteration of the work, we've got a lot of data and discussion with our collaborators about how we might approach this in a different way or how we might tweak things here or there. So next slide. Here's what that's looked like in practice. So I have this slide. Today's efforts build on decades of innovation and leadership, both in our time and before, to support student success. In 2021, we got a new chancellor, Chancellor Sheila Edwards-Lang, who launched a new strategic plan, as new chancellors tend to do, and student success was a top goal for that plan. And then we were tasked with operationalizing what that looks like based on the goals of the strategic plan. So we started with a landscape analysis. We did an inventory of all of our student success efforts, looked for places where there were gaps, and honestly, places where there were redundancies, which there were quite a few of both. And based on that work, we launched 2 years of what we call the student success strategy. Each year we had 5 working groups that were working on specific issues that came directly from that inventory work that we'd been doing over the years. So I'm not going to go through all of these right now, although I would love to, but I'm going to focus on a couple of items here. So I'm going to focus on our student success outcomes and data parties. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we're doing around belonging. And then the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about high impact practices and some work we're doing around purpose, because that's what we're here to talk about today. So the student success outcomes framework came from, so if you think about the way that a lot of student success efforts go, or a lot of efforts go in industry or higher ed, we start with our KPIs, right? With our key performance indicators. And in our case, not surprisingly, we have goals for our 6-year graduation rate and our 1-year retention rate, and removing equity gaps within those rates. For those of you who've been doing this work for a long time, I might be speaking to the choir, but the 6-year graduation rate is an incredibly important number. It's one that, I get called to the regents and I have to present every so often. 6 years ago was 2019. Where were you in 2019? And what's happened between 2019 and now? KPIs are usually for people above our level who are really interested in these strategic metrics. What we often have on the ground are output metrics. How many people attended our events? The example I often use is my unit does registration is a piece of cake. So we bring Huskies and cupcakes so students can come and register. And the number of students who attend those events has been increasing, which is wonderful. That's a really important data point. Have we moved the needle on students registering early, on the outcome of the work that we're doing? So the idea behind the student success outcomes framework is to try and make this easier for practitioners to really look at the outcomes of their work in a way that we can do in a fairly plug and play cross-campus approach. So it's like a modular set of outcomes that we've agreed upon as being important to moving the needle on those KPIs that we are ultimately interested in, but that we're able to say, we're going to do some work around, we're going to do our registration as a piece of cake, and Amanda Shop is going to do some work around registration. Are we moving the needle on something like time to registration? So this is where we are right now on our student success outcomes framework. It includes some very quantitative numbers around academic momentum, some survey instruments, most of which we're adopting sort of nationally researched survey instruments, and then student engagement. One element of this that I'm really excited about is the way that we've been socializing the student success outcomes framework is through something we call data parties. Data parties was adopted from a colleague at UC Davis who works actually for 4-H, which is sort of an interesting way that she got to this. But the idea behind a data party is it's an opportunity for collective insight and strategic clarity. It's an opportunity for us to work together to interpret our data and to turn our data into action. It also serves as a pretty cool professional development opportunity and, quite honestly, a social opportunity for us to come together across campus. We've framed it around this book called You Are a Data Person, which is by Amelia Parnell, who now leads NASPA. And it starts with this idea that every higher ed professional, regardless of their role, can find a use for data in their daily work. You are a data person. All of you are data people. And so the way that we structure this is we have folks identify their own data superpowers that come from the book. So there's 6 different data superpowers. And what we're holding up is little flashing bracelets with your superpower color. So we can create teams that either have the same superpower or different superpowers. We've done a number of these now. We've gotten representation from all across campus. One of my favorite parts about data parties is when 2 people, I've been on that campus like forever, so I know almost everybody, when 2 people who have never met, who've both been in campus for like 6 years are like, hi, nice to meet you. I lead communications. Oh, nice to meet you. I lead advising. Maybe we should know each other. So we've found data parties to be just a really wonderful tool that meets a bunch of different goals. And I can talk about that more during the break if folks want to know more about data parties. Another thing that came out of our student success strategy, so if you remember from our student voices research, sense of purpose and sense of belonging were the 2 elements that rose to the top as for reasons why students left college. We're not going to spend a ton of time of sense of belonging, although I think those of us who are doing this on the ground see a real tight connection between sense of purpose and sense of belonging. But we felt like we often talk about work that fosters a sense of belonging on campus. But we discovered a program that allows us to really put a lot of those ideas of what we want our, sort of the aspiration of what we want our campus to be on the ground. And that is the Student Experience Project, which is a effort that comes out of the APLU, the Urban Serving University Coalition, of which we are members. Although I should mention, if you're interested in getting involved in the SEP, you don't have to be a USU institution. And the whole idea behind the SEP is it's a faculty development program to enhance sense of belonging in the classroom through faculty growth mindset. So not necessarily through student growth mindset, but through faculty growth mindset to be able to really demonstrate to your students that you believe in them. And what we loved about the SEP, I saw a few people raise their hands, they're faculty like me. It's really plug and play. So there are some practices in there around your syllabus, around the way you give feedback, around the way that you provide identity safety in the classroom. And they're all pretty plug and play, where there's some set language that you can adopt or change slightly, however it works for you. My spouse is actually a faculty member who's taking the SEP at the moment. And I'm just so excited every time he's like, oh, I set aside hours to do my SEP homework, but I'm already done. And I think it's really good and really helpful. And I can then move on to all the other things that I need to do today. So if you're interested in the SEP, I've put the link here. It's a really neat program. We've had 50 faculty now have gone through this program, and you multiply out how many students that adds up to, it starts to become thousands. But then to switch gears to sense of purpose, which is what you flew us all out here to talk about, sense of purpose was weaved into all of the student success strategy, but the group that was focused on high impact practices in particular really took on the same idea as we did with belonging. How do we turn this into action? So instead of being an aspiration, how are we doing this on the ground? And so high impact practices, for some of you, you might live and breathe this. You might be able to count these out without looking. But high impact practices who aren't familiar with this jargon is essentially experiential learning. It's experiential learning that increases deep learning, general persistence, and also shrinks outcome gaps. So all students see increases in things like deep learning and retention, but students from marginalized groups tend to have greater increases the more of these high impact practices they're able to experience. And they're things like internships, capstones, and the one that's closest to my heart, undergraduate research. One thing that's important to note about HIPs that I think often gets missed when people present about them is that not all HIPs are created equal. So the AAC&U that put out the original list of HIPs, the work of George Koo, has also expanded the work on HIPs to really focus in on what are the things that are delivered through HIPs that make them be so high impact, so to speak. And there are things like significant investment of time and effort, interaction with instructors and peers, demonstrating the awareness, attitude, knowledge, and skills required to equitably engage and include people from different local and global cultures, frequent, timely, and constructive feedback, periodic structured opportunities to reflect, opportunities to discover relevance through real-world applications. This one's my favorite, the public demonstration of competence and expectations set at appropriate levels. If I can take a moment of just personal pride, this picture is actually my students in the field doing marine biology, which is really, people always ask, how did you get from marine biology to student success? That is how. It's through those experiences and seeing what happened when students had these qualities in their educational experiences and what it led to in terms of their success in college and beyond. So the HIPS group had a big job. They had a lot of people who were interested in joining the group, a lot of people like me who are very interested in doing undergraduate research with upper division students. And we really challenged them to prioritize. So if we're going to work on something in the next couple of years, how can we really move the needle on our bigger student success goals using high impact practices? So they used the framework of the overall strategy. So the importance of sense of purpose that we've talked about so far. We've talked about first three student lens. And then something we've learned through student voice work is that access is really most equitable the more it's integrated into the curriculum and the more it's integrated into the classroom. We have some incredible co-curricular and outside of class time opportunities that are amazing. But if we want to make sure all of our students are having access to these things that we know are really going to serve them, it's got to be tied into class time. And if you take that a step further, it's got to then we need a lot of faculty to be involved in this work. And then we also, through our data, found a low level of availability of these practices in lower division courses or lower division experiences, which is not that surprising. Most students are doing their deep honors thesis work in their senior year. We wanted to think about, well, how can we start delivering these practices earlier in the process? At the same time, our group has been participating in an AAC&U Curriculum to Career Institute, where we're thinking about how we're integrating career and purpose into the curriculum, and we have this tool in HIPS that we know can help integrate career and purpose. So we decided to make those one effort. And as part of the AAC&U work, we have a faculty survey that we've done through NACE, which is I have it up on the next thing, National Association of Career Education. Colleges and employers, thank you. And in that survey, we asked faculty a bunch of questions. And one of the things that came out of that is that faculty want more faculty development about career. But we can drill down a little bit further into that. So one of the questions, one of the questions is, have X group of students ever asked you for career advice in the past year? Students in your own disciplinary area is like 90-something% of students. That's not at all surprising. And then alumni. We have pretty close relationships a lot of times with our alumni. I keep in touch with, dozens of students who came through my lab. And alumni are also going directly to their faculty to ask about career advice. So faculty say, I talk to students all the time about career. I feel really confident in how to talk to students about career in my own discipline or sub-discipline. What I don't feel particularly confident about is how to talk about career more broadly, how to talk about career earlier. And so we want to talk about career earlier, and we know that faculty need some support in figuring out how to do that. And so all of this came together into, next slide, a training that we've started this year called Cultivating Connection and Purpose, which the next couple of slides are copied directly from those workshops that we've been running this year. So on the next slide, one thing that I really love about the way that this came together is the team that's facilitating this includes Don Williams, who's our Director of Career Development and Education, and Dr. Maeve O'Donnell, who is a psychologist who studies the formation of meaning in youth. So we've got like this academic faculty lens, and we have this practitioner career expert working together with our faculty, and we only invited faculty who teach lower division courses. So we're really trying to concentrate them into how do you use HIPS to bring purpose and meaning and career together in your classroom, in the curriculum. So here are some slides that come from their work. One of the things they talk about, I just loved this quote, so I pulled it. A central aspect of meaning and purpose during college is having an opportunity to learn about oneself in relation to others in a career context. So a lot of the earlier career development that we're doing with students is less about, well, you need to know Python in order to get your first job working for Microsoft, right? And it's much more about, who are you? What kinds of environments, what kinds of missions, what are you interested in as a person? And that can help you develop throughout the rest of your time in college as you're skilling up on some of these other things. One thing that I think is really powerful as well is the Career Leadership Collective has put together what they call high impact career practices. So taking this framework of high impact practices and inserting a career lens into it. This comes from a survey that they do. It's a national survey that they do of alumni about not just their career outcomes, but their meaning making in their own career. So they've taken all of that survey data and boiled it down into high impact career practices that include things like career assessments and inventories, internships, career focused advising, reflective assignments linked to career goals, and employer engagement in the curriculum. So as part of this training, we've been introducing a lot of faculty to the NACE competencies, which it's been my experience in higher ed that there are people who like live and breathe the NACE competencies and people who are like, what's NACE? And trying to bring together so that faculty are really getting a better understanding of the profession of career development and ways, again, like the SCP, simple things that they can do in their class class to bring the NACE career readiness competencies into their classes, and I'm going to be a broken record, earlier in the 100 and 200 level. I think that's my last one. Okay, switch back to Amanda.
So in addition to those curricular pieces, which are really critical for more equitable outcomes, we also have a lot of co-curricular work that is happening all of the time. And one of the things that we have also leveraged to help support development of sense of purpose is work-based learning. And so when we think about the definition of an internship, and apologies to folks in career who've heard this ad nauseum, it's really defined by NACE as experiential learning that integrates knowledge and theory learned in the classroom with practical application and skills development in a professional workplace setting. Not all internships are equal, not all internships are for credit, but if they have components, they are really powerful learning tools for students about themselves, their future careers, and reflecting on their own skills and development. So when we think about a traditional internship, that is typically 20 to 40 hours a week, 8 to 12 weeks, typically held over summer. My team became really interested, based on some student voice research, about micro internships, which are much smaller and shorter, 5 to 20 hours a week, 4 to 6 weeks, held at any time during the year. So one of the things that my team found is through those personas that you all just looked at, is that we knew that there is a gap nationally, and we found a gap within our own data that our first generation students were less likely to complete an internship, and we found post-graduation salary gaps in our first destination survey. So that's the post-graduation about 6 months after you graduate outcome survey. And what we learned through those personas that are at your table is that students knew that internships were important. But we need to make sure that if we're offering our students opportunities, that they are paid, that they wanted shorter and more accessible opportunities, that we needed more scaffolding for our students to be prepared to successfully apply for and be competitive in internships and succeed when they're there, and that they wanted experiences in a more cohort and community-based setting as they're preparing for their internships. So based on that, we were able to obtain a grant from KeyBank, and we started offering micro internships. And what we saw was an explosion of interest. And I think that this is what happens when you work from students' voices initially. So our numbers of applications have continued to grow over the 4 different quarters that we've offered this experience. The number of micro internships has grown slowly. I will say when we started that first spring, we were like, oh crap, there's way more interest and we have possible placements. And so we looked internally first and we found a ton of really powerful opportunities within our own campus. Our colleagues in advising, our colleagues in the office of the registrar, our colleagues in finance and administration, our colleagues in IT. So we really started there. And by the time we got to last summer, we had more off-campus micro internships than on-campus micro internships. And we went micro. So these are 4 weeks, 20-hour projects. That's it. But what we found is that it provided students an opportunity to apply for an internship in a way that they hadn't thought of. It was less daunting because it was through the Office of First Gen, where a lot of students have a sense of belonging and sense of home. And then what we found is that even a 4-week, 20-hour project can have a big impact. So we use the Career Readiness Plus inventory, which assesses things like growth and career competencies. It's a formative assessment tool, very positive, directs students to resources on your own campus. It also measures career-aligned social capital, and it also measures students' engagement in high-impact career practices. So a super useful tool. And what we found is that even though this was only a 20-hour project, what we found is that students had the most growth in career-aligned social capital. And so for this example question from that section of the survey is we asked students, have you proactively had a career conversation with a professional at an organization you're interested in working at? Not surprisingly, because of the nature of the project that they were doing, they started with way more no's, and then afterwards we had way more yes, I've had at least once, and yes multiple times. We also had a hypothesis in this that if students were to do a micro internship, they'd be more likely to be competitive and attaining internships. And so what we did is we have one round of data. We'll have our next round of data next spring. But we did interviews with students that participated in those first 2 sessions. And we asked them, did this experience help you progress in your career goals? And is there anything else you'd like to share? And what we found is that at least 46% of the students who had done that micro internship had obtained either an internship or a meaningful job. We are firm believers in not only the power of our local community, but the power of us nationally. And so please do feel free to reach out to us if you have questions, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty about what is measured, how do you measure that, what has been your outcomes for retention for first-gen students. Happy to get into any and all of that.
I just want to say we had high expectations for this group and y'all exceeded them. I felt like those were some really rich conversations. So even happier that you invited us to be here.